Hey lovely people of the internet, so today's video comes to you in 5 parts, and it's basically a political video, which is something I don't do very often, but I had to do it for a class project and thought that it would be great to publish it on YouTube as well. Politics isn't really something I talk about on my channel very often because I don't really like to talk about politics with people in general. I feel like it causes a lot of issues and friendships. Small disclaimer, I'm in no way endorsing Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton or vice versa. But I am kind of endorsing both of them at the same time because I think they are both badasses, and Republicans are just very funny and amusing at times. Former Senator, First Lady, Secretary of State, and overall badass, Hillary Clinton has been running for president since basically 2008, when she lost the Democratic nomination to Barack Obama. Since then, the mainstream media has been following her every move, wondering and speculating, isn't she going to run? Until finally, in April of this year, she came out and released this semi-viral video saying that she was getting ready to do something. She was getting ready to run for president of the United States. And with that, we move on to the fact that it's kind of hard to compete with somebody that has so much publicity inherently devoted to her already. But Democrats are giving it a shot, and among them is U.S. Senator of Vermont, Bernie Sanders. Unlike Hillary, who took the social media savvy route, Bernie Sanders decided to kick it old school and just hold his own press conference later on in the month where he announced that he was going to run for president. But let me backtrack a little. I'm not saying it's hard to compete with Hillary Clinton because of her name and past job descriptions. Those are all things that can be overcome, like a relatively unknown Barack Obama proved back in 2008. It's hard to compete with Hillary Clinton because the mainstream media covers her differently from all other candidates, in this case specifically Bernie Sanders. And she's clearly favored by the corporate mass media. Let's all take a moment to remember that 6 companies own 90% of the media in the US, linked to a super awesome graphic that explains all of this in the down bar. So it becomes easier to get a consensus of what exactly is news from 6 media conglomerates than it is from hundreds of independently owned media outlets. Now the question is why? Why are these 2 candidates covered differently, and why is Hillary Clinton favored? Which leads to part 2 of this video. Let's face it, Bernie Sanders is largely dismissed and ignored by the mass media. But before we get into all that, let's begin by narrowing down the mass media for the specific purposes of this video to the New York Times, CNN, and network nightly newscasts, which I feel are all representative of the news spectrum covering the specific topic, Republican outlets included. And if you don't believe me, feel free to look at other news sources and see for yourself the same patterns that I'm going to be discussing in this video. Okay, so back to Bernie being ignored. How exactly is this being done? Well, for starters, evening news broadcasts have given him way less prime time when compared to Hillary Clinton. According to Andrew Tyndall, who monitors weekday nightly newscasts of CBS, ABC, and NBC, the Sanders campaign was only given 2 minutes of coverage up until October 7th. Clinton got 26 minutes, and Vice President Joe Biden, who at the time wasn't even running and has since said he won't be, received 6 minutes of coverage. Way more than a guy who had already said, hey, I'm running for president back in April. Coverage has picked up since the first Democratic debate, but there's still a nagging sense that Sanders isn't being taken as seriously as his running mate. The coverage he does end up receiving is either negative or basically dismissive. A prime example of this comes from the New York Times public editor Margaret Sullivan, who writes about the newspaper's journalism. In an entry she wrote back in September titled, "Has the Times Dismissed Bernie Sanders?" she said, and I quote, "For the Times, Bernie Sanders' entry into the presidential race was almost a non-event, although many candidates' declarations were treated on the front page with considerable fanfare. Mr. Sanders was tucked inside the paper on page A21. Sullivan then began a mini investigation of her own of sorts, where she looked back at the Times coverage of the presidential Democratic race so far, and she found that in August of this year alone, Sanders was covered in 14 articles compared to Hillary Clinton, who received 54 articles written about her. Granted, those 54 articles were basically about her email scandal, but we'll get to that later. The tipping point comes with the fact that Donald Trump, who, like Sanders, is considered an extreme long shot for his party's nomination, was covered by the Times in August alone 63 times. 63 times, guys. If someone like Trump is getting that much coverage, why is Bernie Sanders being largely ignored by the mass media? Well, for starters, his socialistic views don't agree with big business. Remember what I said before about 6 companies controlling everything Americans read, watch, or listen to? Yeah, well, Bernie Sanders wants to stop that from happening. He's consistently opposed media consolidation, and in an interview back in 2012 with Bill Moyers, he said the FCC should get some public discussion and ultimately rule against this cross-ownership type of approach. What he's saying is this: when these big corporations absorb smaller media outlets, it limits the variety and diversity of the media we consume, and not all parts of society are accurately presented or heard. He seems to have a point there, but guess who doesn't really like where the flow of this conversation is going? You guessed it, the 6 media conglomerates that Bernie wants to break up. But this isn't the only reason the media ignores Bernie Sanders. Horse race coverage and its reliance on a winner-takes-all system also plays a crucial role. We're just gonna wait until the siren passes, because that's annoying, isn't it? For those of you not familiar with the term, it's basically political journalism that resembles the coverage of a horse race because of its focus on polling data and public perception instead of actual candidate policy. It's not very informative, to say the least, but it's what we get. Like I said before, this type of journalism always has a winner and a loser. In this case, the winner would be Hillary Clinton, and do I really even have to say who the loser is? And the winner always takes all, including coverage. That moves us to part 3 of this video. We get it. Hillary's covered frequently, but wait, she's also covered negatively? As Bernie pointed out in the first debate, the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails. Damn right. For weeks on end, the only sort of coverage we got on Hillary Clinton was about her damn emails, which are a really long story in and of itself that I can't even begin to explain, and it would probably take up the majority of this video. So for all intents and purposes, I'm providing a link down there to a really nice story that covers how this whole machination of email coverage began in the first place, and that explains everything much better than I ever could. Apart from the emails, the media has also really focused in on her position changes on issues like gay marriage, immigration, gun control, etc., etc. And they've also really relied on her emotional state for some reason. Now, let's make it clear that she was never said to be happy or in a normal state of mind. No. Hillary Clinton is always represented as, oh my god, she's crying and she's unbalanced, or she's cruel to one of her staffers. Like, it's always something very negative. And very few news sources actually talked about her policies, which brings us back to the topic of horse racing, but with an added ingredient: negativity. Now, you always hear people saying, I want to stop watching the news because everything is really bad, or I've already stopped watching the news because I just couldn't handle the amount of negativity. We live in a very messed up world. Just think about everything we've seen headlining the news these past couple of weeks. It's horrible, but a lot of good things do happen in the world as well, but they largely go unnoticed by the media. Why is this? Why does the media concentrate on the negative? Simple answer, guys. It's because of us. Yeah, I hate to admit it, but we crave bad news. We like reading about conflict. I know you wanted to hear, oh, the media is trying to brainwash us or something, but in reality, it's not. Media is business, at least in the US, and we like conflict, so they are going to sell us conflict because that is what we will buy. No one would buy a newspaper about all the happy and glorious things happening around the world. It just wouldn't make a profit. So, guess what we get, guys? Negative media. Even a New York Times correspondent, James Reston, says, we are fascinated by events, but not by the things that cause the events. Hence why we get weeks of coverage of these Clinton emails, but at the end of the day, there's people who know of the emails, but don't know at all why we started hearing about them in the first place. A one-word refresher for those people: Benghazi. Again, link is in the down bar for more information. So, quick recap before we move on to the next part of this video. Number 1, 6 media conglomerates own 90% of everything we read, watch, or listen to. Number 2, we've established that Bernie Sanders gets largely ignored by the media because his socialistic views don't go hand in hand with big business. And horse race coverage needs a winner and a loser. And let's face it, Hillary Clinton isn't out to get the 6 conglomerates that own 90% of our media. Number 3, Clinton is covered frequently but negatively because that's the kind of thing that sells. And now we're ready to go on to part 4 of this video. The first Democratic debate was won by Hillary Clinton. It was won by Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton. Okay, what? Since Nixon's sweaty appearance next to a gorgeous movie star looking Kennedy back in 1960, debates have always had a winner and a loser. Horse race coverage. It's just gotten worse since then. At the end of every debate, you begin to hear commentators' opinions, keyword opinions, on who they've thought has just won the debate, literally seconds after it's just ended. Because apparently discussion forums are now competitions. But let's get back to the Hills and Bernie. The day after the first Democratic debate, the headlines all read that Clinton had won the debate. CNN, the New York Times, and Time, among others, all had headlines looking like this. Which is weird because CNN ran a poll the night before asking viewers who they thought won the debate, and the clear winner was Sanders. They replaced that poll the next day with a picture of Hillary Clinton and a headline that ran, "Poised, passionate, and in command." This didn't just happen with CNN. It happened with a lot of other major news media sites that all had polls on their websites asking people who had won, and the clear winner, again, was obviously Bernie Sanders. But the next day, all of their headlines read that Hillary Clinton had somehow won. And then a strange thing becomes even more strange when focus groups done by Fusion, CNN, and Fox all claim the same result. Bernie Sanders had won the debate. Sanders was mentioned 407,000 times on Twitter, more than any other candidate combined. And according to US News and World Report, he was the most talked about candidate on Facebook of the night. So why did the headlines of every major news source the next day claim that Clinton had won? Well, for starters, CNN's parent company, Time Warner, is one of Hillary Clinton's biggest donors. Cue fact check. And who are Bernie Sanders' top contributors? The majority of his money has come from thousands of people mailing in $30 like he mentioned in the second debate. So what does this all tell us? That this 5-part video has officially come to an end and that news media focus their stories on the systematic structure that they are bound to. It's easy to understand. Like I said before, media equals money in this country, so whatever sells is going to be published. Hence, the negativity and horse racing. What doesn't work to create money and instead tries to break these conglomerates apart gets ignored or reduced to the loser of the race. Which means that this corporate chain and non-local ownership have consequences on the tone that campaign stories take and how candidates are covered.